Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, 60 glorious minutes of multifaceted discussion where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and we feature the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyagolu. Coming up in the next hour, as the world marks International Day to End Violence Against Women, the UN releases some grim statistics. A third of all women and girls around the world have experienced physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, and half of women killed worldwide were killed by their families or partners. Campaigners have been marching over the weekend in many countries, saying that enough isn't being done to eliminate violence against women. We'll speak to advocates of women's rights in Nigeria. And later, as mobile health or mHealth gains importance around the world, changing and improving the way healthcare services are delivered, we examine how mobile technology can be used in Nigeria to provide better healthcare in the country. At least one company here is aiming to use smartphones to collect client data, monitor clients, and deliver health counseling, uniting all three in one big contact technology center that'll bridge the gap between patients and medical practitioners. We'll speak to an expert in a moment. Now, demonstrations have been taking place across the world against domestic violence suffered by millions of women around the globe. Violence against women and the systematic violation of their human rights are among the most widespread in the world, but much of it goes unreported due to impunity, shame, and gender inequality. According to the United Nations, violence perpetrated against women has become as common a cause of death and incapacity as cancer, and a greater cause of ill health than road accidents and malaria combined. According to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the prevalence and persistence of this problem means that someone around you, a family member, co-worker, a friend, or even yourself, has experienced this type of abuse. Well, in a moment, we'll speak to two people who are working to end violence against women. But first, here's the UN Chief Antonio Guterres delivering his message marking International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women.
The United Nations is committed to ending all forms of violence against women and girls. These abuses are among the world's most horrific, persistent and widespread human rights violations, affecting 1 in every 3 women in the world. That means someone around you, a family member, a co-worker, a friend, or even you yourself. Sexual violence against women and girls is rooted in centuries of male domination. Let us not forget that the gender inequalities that fuel rape culture are essentially a question of power imbalances. Stigma, misconceptions, underreporting, and poor enforcement of the laws only perpetuate impunity. And rape is still being used as an horrendous weapon of war. All of that must change now. I call on governments, the private sector, civil society, and people everywhere to take a firm stand against sexual violence and misogyny. We must show greater solidarity with survivors, advocates, and women's rights defenders. And we must promote women's rights and equal opportunities. Together, we can and must end rape and sexual assault of all kinds.
And that's the UN Secretary General there, Antonio Guterres. Well, for more on the International Day to End Violence Against Women, I'm joined now in the studio by Khadija EL-Usman, who's a lawyer, gender activist, and member of the North Normal Campaign Against Domestic Violence, and by Murtala Abdullahi, who's also a member of the North Normal Campaign and founder of the Goro Initiative, which focuses on environmental issues. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
Special day? Important day?
It is. It is. We're looking at a day to end sexual and gender-based violence. It's huge. It's huge that we're celebrating that day in Nigeria because we have this silent, prevalent culture of violence against women. I mean, it happens in the littlest spaces, in the littlest of ways, in our little conversations. So it is a special day.
Right. Outline for us, if you will, the scale of violence against women in Nigeria? You deal with data collection and all that sort of thing in your organization, I imagine.
You know, it's a bit difficult to quantify because, as you said earlier, these things are barely reported, barely recorded, and even when they are reported, nothing seems to be done about it, so it continues to discourage a lot of people from doing so. But we can say, from at least the UN statistics, 1 in 3 women experience gender and sexual-based violence, and that is huge.
And what form does that violence take?
You know, it's when we say gender and sexual-based violence, it's very widespread. We're talking anything really that causes physical or mental pain to women, and that includes the threat of such an act. So we're looking at, you know, child marriages that we've been trying to fight, female gender mutilation. We're talking about sexual harassment, actual physical abuse, rape. It goes on and on, really. And
Mr. Abdullahi, presumably there are laws in Nigeria against this.
Yeah, absolutely. Over the years, we've had laws, and activists have been asking the government to improve on these laws. And more recently, we have had the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, the VAP, which was passed, and then some states have domesticated it, and a lot of states in northern Nigeria have not done that. And then, so today, to commemorate the day to end the violence against women, a lot of activists around northern Nigeria came out to call for domestication of this law, and then it went peacefully in almost all the states except in Sokoto, where some of the members were arrested by the police because of now there's this culture. I do not want to okay, I'll use the word phobia. People tend to have misconception about what it means to ask for the VAP or what it means to ask for this Child Rights Act, the CRA, because of cultural reasons that have also allowed sexual and gender-based violence to be prevalent in our society. So these same reasons are also obstacles to enforcement of these laws or the implementation.
And presumably there are no parts of Nigeria where it is more prevalent. I mean, it just happens, you know, around the country.
Like my colleague said, the cycle of silence. So it's difficult to say this region has more, but what we know is that the north has more prevalence of people not speaking out because of stigma, because of society issues, because of culture issues.
So it's underreported.
Yeah, it's underreported. Right. And then secondly, the weak criminal justice system does not encourage people to report. It's because if you report, the case takes long. Sometimes the victims become double victims. They get traumatized by the process. So there's inefficiency in the system that ensures that victims are able to report their cases.
Right. Let me bring you in, Khadija. So just taking on from what Mr. Abdullahi was saying there, it is societal pressure, isn't it, which is going to bring about change?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, if you look at the Constitution of Nigeria, for instance, the preamble says, "We the people." So it's presumed that we the people are the people who make these laws and enforce these laws. And we have seen various situations where the people have demanded for something, and the government has come out to, you know, give those things. So I would say, yes, if we collectively come out and speak in one voice, pressure the government, then they have absolutely no choice than to do so, especially if, you know, we say that we are running a democratic system, and that's what democracy is.
But of course, while we're waiting for the people to throng out onto the streets, which is not something that is likely to happen unless you educate them better, because this is obviously a hugely important issue, why aren't the laws in Nigeria being applied?
Well, for one thing, okay, like Murtala said, there are some laws in place, but a lot of the laws in place are obsolete, like the penal code and the criminal code that criminalizes assault and the like. The fines you would get in the penal code would be, say, 100 naira or thereabouts, which is why we're pushing for laws like the Violence Against Persons Prohibitions Act to be domesticated in all the states, because it's not only updated. I mean, one of the beautiful ways it's updated is that it recognizes rape for men, right? Nigeria had always, all the laws in Nigeria before now has said, you know, only women can be raped, and it has to be a penal vaginal thing going on. And this time it says penetration whatsoever to a person. Yes. So why aren't these things even being looked at to be domesticated is because of our culture. It's because we see women as less. Women who speak out are tagged lesbians, prostitutes, and they are threatening to society for whatever reason.
In other words, they don't have the same decorum that you normally associate with a well-brought-up woman, which of course is absolute nonsense. But let me bring you in, Murtala Abdullahi. She was talking about domesticating the laws and making them more relevant. But I mean, there are laws, as you said. There are police officers, men and women, who know the law. Why don't they act?
This challenge is huge. Even the police itself, they have cases of violence against women, either during deployment or normally within police operations. For instance, in Abuja, there was the EAB, an Environmental Protection Board raid, in which some women were violated. And so it shows you that the scale of the matter is not just about the society itself, including the people who are responsible for enforcing some of these laws are also responsible for violating women. We also have cases of police sent for deployment for either peace support operations across Nigeria to calm down cases of crisis, conflict. And so that's why in terms of violence against women, we also have conflict-related sexual violence. So it's not just about domestic violence, there's so many angles. So the institution itself, in some cases, also encourages the violence against women. And that's why, for us, we believe that a holistic approach to the matter is required, from primary school to institution.
So it involves education.
Absolutely.
That's a good word. Holistic.
Investing in laws, implementing the laws, educating people, enlightening people. Because for us, we believe that the first form of protecting women is to prevent the act from happening, not after the act has happened. So education is important, deterrence is important. The laws are not necessary to punish people, but they are to deter people from committing these acts.
Right, and just add a quick word to what he said before we have to take a short break.
I mean, I think the only thing I'd have to say is that we're also working on victim response. You know, we need some sort of empathy from these, those who enforce these laws. When people come to report these things, you don't bring your cultural and personal beliefs into the situation and start asking victim-blaming questions like, why were you there, and things like that.
What were you wearing?
Right, and presumably there are proposals, very specific proposals. I mean, if I was a government official now and I said, okay, we want to deal with this, we want specific proposals. I know you touched on this before, but you must have proposals from your organizations, NGOs and that sort of thing, about how to deal with violence against women, the best way to do it. And what we will do is that we'll talk about this when we come back, because I've just been told that we've got to take a short break. But it's always good to have proposals ready, aren't they? If just in case you're asked for them, and you can put them forward, and then that can push the whole argument in the direction you want it to go. Stay with us. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat marking the UN's International Day to End Violence Against Women. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyagolo. Now, as you may have seen and heard, demonstrations have been taking place across the world against domestic violence. Tens of thousands have marched in Paris, Belgium, across Europe, Asia, South Africa, and elsewhere, calling for an end to gender violence and the murders of women by their partners. It's estimated that thousands of women have been murdered around the world, including Nigeria, by their existing or former partner. It's been called the world's shame. And some governments, including the administration in France, have announced new measures to combat violence against women. But critics say those measures are far too little and far too late. In a moment, we'll chat some more about all that. But first, here's the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, announcing a new campaign to end violence against women in his country.
We have heard the pleas of survivors of gender-based violence that they would like to be treated with respect by our criminal justice system. In opening this new sexual offences court, we are affirming the right of the women and the girls of our country to be treated by the criminal justice system with dignity, with understanding, with compassion, with professionalism and empathy. The opening of the court today, together with the signing of the Declaration Against Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, are two of the measures we have put in place since the Presidential Summit convened in November of last year. The summit, which was attended by well over 1,200 women from all walks of life, opened the eyes, it also opened the ears, and it even opened the hearts of many of our people to the gravity and the impact of gender-based violence in our country. Since the summit, we have seen the rise of mass-based social movements that has embraced both women and men from across racial, cultural, religious, political, and socio-economic divides. They have been united by one common cause: to see an end to gender-based violence. We've gathered here today as representatives from across society, from women's organizations, from faith-based and community organizations, and from the legal and law enforcement fraternity. As a nation, today we are making a bold and unequivocal declaration that we refuse, as the people of South Africa, to yield to and to accept gender-based violence. This is a practice that must be obliterated from the face of South Africa once and for all.
And that's the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. And still with me in the studio as we continue our chat about ending violence against women, Khadija EL-Usman, who is a lawyer, gender activist, and member of the North Normal campaign against domestic violence, and Murtala Abdullahi, who's also a member of the North Normal campaign and founder of the Goro Initiative, which focuses on environmental issues. Thank you for staying with us. And we're talking to you just before we went on the break about measures that you have, proposals to deal with this. We just heard President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa launching a campaign to end violence against women there. He's urging men to abandon sexist and patriarchal attitudes, and he's also set aside more than $100 million for a 6-month emergency plan to deal with the problem. What's your reaction to that?
That's amazing. I mean, if only we had that budget that would be used, it would be amazing, because what we came up with as a response to sexual and gender-based violence, we broke down in about 4 different stages. The first is the education and enlightenment, obviously. That will happen in schools and homes and the like. Then we're looking at...
And from a fairly elementary level,
yes,
right?
Exactly. Then we're also looking at reporting and the justice system. So we're looking at the police force and the courts, right? Then we'd now move to healthcare and the response to that. You know, if we're looking at situations of rape, then we need fast-acting emergency situations. And then when we go from that, we now go to mental health support, because a lot of people are going through a lot of trauma, and mental health is not something we've taken very seriously in this country. So we're looking at situations where after all of this has happened, people still have safe spaces where they can talk about these things and recover from what has happened to
Right, and Mr. Abdullahi, clearly, as you mentioned, the issue of awareness absolutely critical, because as you, I think, pointed out at the outset, you can't have policemen in every single household. I mean, people have to come to the awareness, a husband has to come to the awareness, or a partner, that, you know, I simply can't do this. It's not right. I mean, this person is human. They shouldn't be treated this way. And at this point, you would say that there clearly is not enough awareness about just how widespread this problem is in Nigeria.
Absolutely, the awareness is not that much. And that's why we talk about enlightenment and awareness as a way of countering and curbing the prevalence of sexual and gender-based violence. It starts from the home. It starts from the kids level. When you have kids who are not taught empathy, who are
and probably watching the father abusing the mother.
And then the male child is not made to see his female sister as someone who is equal to him, has the same dignity and rights like him. And then also we have women who feel domestic violence is nothing, it's part of society. So there are lots of things to unlearn, and there are new things that we need to learn, and so to give people the powers they need. And then secondly, financial independence. A lot of women cannot leave domestic violence because they do not have the financial capacity to leave. They feel like, what next? What will happen with me? I better stay here where I get to eat 3 square meals, where I can get to have a roof over my head. So and that's why we talk about holistic approach. And so if you're done with the family, you've addressed the family issues, and you go to law enforcement issues. And also the police are also part of the society, and so some of the mentality is being transferred into the police. So you ensure that you have gender-sensitive law enforcement. The law enforcement officer not just have gender decks, that every law enforcement officer knows gender sensitivity, and he conducts himself in that manner, either during normally regular deployment or special deployment. And so also the court system takes a lot of times. It's too long. It makes the victims add more pain to the victim. And so that's why we want a holistic approach. And then more recently, technology helps a lot. Through either Twitter, Instagram, and so many other platforms, there's been a lot of education and awareness. Social media to get in touch with the younger generation that this is bad, this is what you need to unlearn, and this is how to treat others, and this is how to see the dignity in everyone. And then so also in terms of response, how do you improve response using technology? And so because technology helps to reduce vulnerabilities and helps to help victims in terms of response or providing support to victims. Yeah.
Right, but if I was, I mean, sitting here just listening to you talk, and obviously you're talking quite lucidly about it, I would wonder which, given that I can't do everything at the same time, which do you think should be the absolute first step?
So one, we need sincere commitment from the government. We always have campaigns. Today they sit somewhere and then announce very new nice ideas and strategies, but nothing gets done.
No follow-up.
Investment is not made correctly. Implementation is not done correctly. Sometimes you have the wrong people in the right places, and so the whole project gets stagnated or something of that man. So one, we need sincere commitment from the government, sincere commitment for everyone within the institutional level, then investment in education and awareness, because we believe that prevention is better than actually response. So if we can prevent these crimes from happening, then that's the most important thing. And then the last aspect is criminal justice system. The criminal justice system ensures that victims get justice. It ensures that there is deterrence for people not to commit this crime. And secondly, what kind of process do these criminals go through? Do they just stay in prisons and then come back and repeat this crime, or are they form of processes, either mental or psychological, to ensure that when they leave, they do not repeat this crime?
Right. Okay. Let me bring you in, Khadija EL-Usman. I mustn't forget the L there. You were talking earlier about the importance of. You were commending the South African president for the amount of money that he's put forward, $100 million for a 6-month campaign. I suppose funding, or a lack of it, is crucial here, because you need money to train more police and the public in general about this, and to possibly even open shelters for battered women who are victims of domestic violence.
Funding is always a huge problem. If you have had to deal with the police force a lot, you would find that it's always been a hindrance. Money. You could need them to quickly respond to something, go to a place, and they would not do that because they do not have the finances to even transport themselves from one situation to the next. You'd find a lot of divisional police stations that don't use their police cars for emergency situations and things like that because they're trying to preserve the fuel. So we need to...
In other words, they don't consider this to be a priority. So they'd use the whatever resources they have towards what they see as priority, which is why training is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So from there, I think we also need a curriculum in schools for sex education. And when I say sex education, I mean proper sex education, not don't do it, it's bad. Something in depth that shows people how much harm can be done in such situations. So I think the fact that our culture of silence and shame, shying away from certain situations have definitely put us in worse situations than would have actually been in if we just openly had certain conversations.
Right, okay, stay with us. We've got a few more minutes to chat about this, but I'm afraid we've got to take a break. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat marking the UN's International Day to End Violence Against Women. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyagolu. Now, according to the United Nations, violence against women and girls is rooted in centuries of male domination, and the UN has been reminding the world that stigma, misconceptions, underreporting and poor enforcement of laws perpetuate impunity, particularly in cases of rape and sexual violence. Today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and the global spotlight is shining on the scale of the problem. The UN is sharing the many ways in which the scourge manifests itself in physical, sexual and psychological forms, and the organization is underscoring the life-altering adverse consequences women suffer as a result. In a moment, we'll continue our assessment of the situation for women here in Nigeria. But first, here's a short video released this week to mark International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Powerful stuff. And still with me in the studio as we continue our chat about ending violence against women, Khadija EL-Usman, who's a lawyer, gender activist, and member of the North Normal Campaign Against Domestic Violence, and Murtala Abdullahi, who's also a member of the North Normal Campaign and founder of the Goro Initiative, which focuses on environmental issues. Thank you for staying with us. And I'll come to you, Murtala. The Nigerian government has launched the Sex Offenders Register today. Is that a significant step?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very important step forward in terms of deterring individuals from actually committing this crime when they know there's a price to it. Either you cannot get a job, you cannot get a visa to travel abroad, and then so many other consequences for your actions. So it's like letting people know that there's going to be a consequence to your action. But however, you need to prosecute someone successfully before you put him on the register. So you have to fix the criminal justice system that delays the process of prosecution. And then also you have to improve response in terms of allowing victims' ability to report cases. So you need all this process fixed. And lastly, the most important thing is to prevent the acts from happening. That's the most important thing for us.
And just broadly speaking, I know you've talked about this previously, Khadija. Looking again at the state of play in Nigeria, we heard the South Africans, the South African president there. We heard the French Prime Minister. We've seen quite a bit of activity around the world. Any chance that something on the scale of presidential support would happen here in Nigeria?
Well, I couldn't possibly speak to whether or not something as huge as that would happen.
Yeah, but are you pushing for that sort of thing?
We're trying. The question is whether or not the response will come, because as much as we want these changes, Nigeria has a lot of challenges, and those in government might see other things as priority. You know, we're standing side by side with nations who have issues with gender-based violence, but at the same time, we also have issues with electricity and unemployment and security, and it's a lot to handle. It's a lot. So some governments might see other things as priority, but we think this is priority because sexual and gender-based violence holds back or puts back about 50% of the population. So that affects about 50% of the possible output that we could have in our economy.
It affects development.
Yes, it does. So
Absolutely.
this is priority as far as we are concerned.
Right. And just to buttress her point, Murtala, I mean, I suppose if I can use the word, in fairness to the Nigerians, what is most worrying about this is that in modern progressive societies and democracies such as France, for example, I mean, we saw the figures coming out of France over the weekend, the level of this patriarchal attitude continues to prevail. I mean, what more traditional societies such as Nigeria?
Yeah, absolutely. Even the modern society is having a lot of issues, and that's why you had the recent Me Too movement in the US that caused a lot of very big names, their jobs and the rest. And so it's a global issue, and that's why you have a day like this in Nigeria. And so that's why the action needs to happen across the world and to stop some of these traditions and cultural issues that we have, to ensure that there are safe spaces for everyone where they live, where they work, where they study. The workplace needs to be safe. People who go to school to study, like we had the issues in Lagos, and people need to be able to study.
The university is what we saw, right.
And also we need inclusion of women in governance and development space. We shouldn't just include women because we want to fill in the margin. We want to say we have women included. No, they should be there because they deserve to be there, because they need to be there. And so we should open the floor for everyone. When we have more women in governance, they tend to influence policies that helps us to address some of these issues. When we have more women in security forces and law enforcement, they tend to also influence the perception and also the behavior of our law enforcement agents. So it's important to let women, give women equal opportunity in these areas.
And Khadija, the French government, there were big demonstrations in Paris over the weekend about this gender violence issue. The French government has outlined a whole series of proposals aimed at ending domestic violence against women, including investment for police training, which is one of the things you were talking about, recognizing the psychology, you know, that psychological violence is in fact a form of domestic violence. What do you think of that plan?
It's amazing. I wish we could very quickly catch up to these nations, but we recognize that Nigeria is a developing nation. With our campaign, we've had a lot of backlash as regards people's cultures and religions and the feeling that women are less. Just before we came here, Murtala told me that the best approach to this is starting slowly, a bit sort of incorporating people's cultures, you know, trying to tell them that these things are not so far from your culture and religion.
I suppose education is part of it, because if people are illiterate in some ways, they are bound more by the limits of their culture,
exactly,
than a more sort of broader perspective.
Yes, so I think it's a bit unfair to compare ourselves to nations like France, because we're definitely not there yet, but we're trying, and I feel like we're moving at a very fast pace. So you would not imagine the number of organizations that are doing the work that we're doing. In fact, starting this campaign, we started with about 14 organizations. We all came together, and even then, it was not enough. So really, kudos to everybody that is doing what they're doing. And I would definitely tell everyone to change things in your little spaces, you know, within your family, within your work environments. That's how we make the difference, just little by little, you know.
And Spain has created a specialized court to deal with gender violence. So that fundamentally changes the way the issue is dealt with in the courts. An important first step, but it's always really about implementation, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for the Spanish government, they will not have an issue implementing that, because the society already acknowledged that they have a problem, and they want to solve the problem. But over here in Nigeria, the challenges are enormous. We have the CRA, the Child Rights Act, that is facing serious backlash in a lot of places, because it has laws on and speculation like when a child can get married 18 years or not, and then there are a lot of people who feel that it's against their cultural norms, their traditional norms, and so we have states that have refused to implement this Child Rights Act. So also the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, we have states that do not want to enforce it, because they feel their tradition and culture allows them to beat women, allows them to do some of the things. I feel when you call these things violent, they don't see it as violent. It's feel like it's like correcting someone, or so. We have to drive the conversation a lot to ensure that people understand that this is a problem. It affects us a lot. It affects, as my colleague was saying, our productivity, and also leads a lot of women to drug abuse, and drug abuse tends to cause stable homes. Stable homes tend to affect the stability of the entire society, and then also affect the security, because gender security is an important component of our national security, and so it's a huge problem, and that's why we always talk about it's a holistic approach that is needed. And so for the Spanish government, it's going to be easy, because the conversation is known, and people know they have a problem, and they want to solve the problem, and their challenges are not like ours. Our challenges are a lot. There are a lot of things to unlearn, and then also within our cultures, there are a lot of examples of how women are respected. Traditionally, how women are given dignity, they are respected for who they are, and then all of a sudden we select certain aspect of the cultures and use it to silence women and use it to abuse women. So that's why we have to tailor our own approaches based on our own environment.
Yeah, Murtala, if I may, right now the Human Rights Commission has a tribunal for sexual violence. They're going around the 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria. But I was just watching on the news yesterday that they were having a problem with people coming up. Even those who were scheduled to come up and speak were not showing up. And that's what we're talking about. It's the silence, it's the shame, you know. Someone would have a problem going in front of the world and saying, I was raped or I was harassed. You know, how would that affect my standing in society? People are going to look at me some type of way. We saw the reaction to the very popular scandal between Pastor Fatoyebo and Busola Dakolo. It was insane, you know, the reaction to it. There was a lot of, you know, how could her husband let her say something like that? How would her children react when they grow up to see that their mother was raped? You know, like it was something that was her fault. We got more backlash on her than the supposed alleged perpetrator. So, yeah.
That's a very important point you've just raised there. So we must deal more with perceptions, and also the whole idea of machismo in societies, where male domination is seen as the way that God has created society, and therefore the man has to take charge and so on. But I want to thank both of you very much indeed, Khadija EL-Usman and Murtala Abdullahi. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.
You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead. As mobile health, or mHealth, gains importance around the world, companies in Nigeria have been looking at ways to use mobile technology to try to provide better health care in the country. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyagolo. Now, it's a mobile health campaign that will guide the government, the Ministry of Health, private medical centers, NGOs, and mobile companies on how they can save lives in a country like Nigeria, where the healthcare system is still developing. It's a groundbreaking subscription-based service that unites hospital subscribers to an emergency hotline service that uses GPRS to determine the location of the caller and the extent of their ailment. Then, based on their location, the patient is referred to the nearest hospital, from which an ambulance is dispatched to pick up the patient and deliver them for treatment in as short a time as possible. The service is being managed by several companies which are already fairly well known, some of them dealing with call centers, job placement, that sort of thing. Well, in a moment, we'll speak to one expert about mHealth. But first, here's a short video showing how the mHealth initiative is supposed to work.
Do you have a medical emergency? Why not contact the Altus Company Emergency Hotline today? The Altus Company Emergency Hotline service is a revolutionary solution that is designed to save lives. Kindly call the Medical Emergency Hotline to get instant help, and the number is 0908 733 2356. Again, 0908 733 2356. The Altus Company Emergency Hotline works like this. A call comes to the emergency hotline. The GPRS service determines the location of the caller. The Altus Company agent attends to the call and asks relevant questions. Based on location, the patient is referred to the nearest hospital. The ambulance service of the hospital is immediately contacted to take the patient to the hospital for treatment. The Altus Company Emergency Service, designed to save lives.
I was getting a bit worried there when I heard that siren. Well, for more on the mHealth initiative, I'm joined now in the studio by Marian Kuda, who is the former Chief Operating Officer for the outsourced company and who has become something of an expert on mHealth. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. So in effect, this is an alliance between hospitals, possibly the government's health ministry, mobile phone companies, and companies that provide more efficient healthcare. Tell us more about how this is going to work, because I got really excited when I heard about it.
Okay. So I would like to point out that mHealth is also called e-health, and some people also call it digital health. So they are all more or less encapsulating the concept of using telecommunication network to improve access to health. So it has to do more than just having people access to ambulances. It has a lot, the scope of mobile health is way more than just having access to emergencies. It's quite broad.
Yeah, because I was actually reading somewhere about what they're doing in South Africa, where there's an encoded message or something on a bottle of medicine that a SIM card recognizes, and which then sends an alarm if somebody is not taking the medicine or something to that effect. I mean, but just starting with the bit that you, along with other companies, are putting in place in Nigeria, how groundbreaking is that in a country like this, mHealth?
Yeah, mHealth is groundbreaking for two reasons, because we have not waited for the government to be the one to initiate it. Usually, the government will have a policy on M-Health or E-Health, and then we'll try and get it into the mainstream, and then try and get a buy-in from the private sector. So why the idea of starting now is groundbreaking is because we have not even waited for some kind of evolution in the healthcare system. We are basically saying, okay, you know what, we have the technology, we have the medical capacity, let's just put it together and see what we can come up with, and how can we save life, how can we solve problems.
And of course, just looking at the statistics, I mean, there are millions of people who die every year in Nigeria simply because they can't access or get access to healthcare.
Exactly. The thing about healthcare is that in most parts of the world, they are going from treating people to preventing illnesses. So, and however, in Nigeria, you see on social media or some on television, people with illnesses that have degenerated so badly because they didn't get the preventive health, or they didn't get the early intervention when it was diagnosed. So a lot of treatments are cheaper and easier when they are spotted early, which is why M-Health offers this ability for doctors to, you know, help patients wherever they are located, as opposed to, you know, it increases accessibility. That way, it's not when the disease has degenerated so badly before you can see a medical practitioner.
But of course, the converse angle to that is that most doctors don't live in the rural areas, for example. They live in the cities and are not therefore able to serve the broader sort of rural communities where millions of people live.
I like the fact that you brought that up, because that is exactly the problem M-Health is trying to solve. The World Health Organization recommends that the patient-to-doctor ratio should be 1 doctor to 600 patients. Nigeria's ratio is 1 doctor to 6,300 patients. And I think that is still...
That's a scary statistic.
And that's just for general practitioners. For radiologists that will look at your scan and interpret your illness, I think is 1 to 6,000, 6,500.
Right.
So it's sorry, I mean 65,000.
Okay.
Yeah, one radiologist to 65,000 patients. So that has now allowed a lot of quacks. So the reason why mobile health is an amazing idea is that people in the rural areas have access to GSM. Nigeria has almost 170 million GSM subscribers based on the June report from the...
In a country of 200 million people.
Exactly.
So it's an incredible penetration,
exactly.
isn't it? Yeah.
So this penetration, wherever you are, whichever local government you are, you have a mobile phone. And most of the doctors are located in urban areas. So that's what M-Health does. It allows us to bridge that gap. So the doctor does not have to be physically in the rural area, but he can still consult to some extent.
Right. Well, but the other problem, of course, is that what I'm hearing of these initiatives, M-Mobile initiatives, M-Health initiatives, are that they are subscription-based, which means that people will have to pay for it. I mean, how much of a drawback is that in a country where the majority of people live in poverty?
Well, I can say that it's still cheaper than traveling abroad. For example, when it comes to what we call health tourism, Nigeria is the leading African country. It's a $1 billion a year that we spend on going abroad to get treatment.
But it's a tiny percentage of the population who go abroad.
Exactly.
So it still eliminates all the other lots who can't afford to go abroad.
No, but it will still make it more accessible.
Right.
That's exactly my point. Like, even for a lot of people go abroad for treatments that they can even get here. They just don't have this, they have this mindset that they don't trust the Nigerian healthcare system. So, but if the thing about M-Health is we are hoping that it will allow doctors abroad in diaspora to still be able to consult in Nigeria, reduce, somehow maybe compensating for the shortfalls that is created by the brain drain.
Yeah, but what about the other issue, which is the fact that there are very few well-equipped hospitals in Nigeria as a whole?
In terms of the laboratories?
Well, laboratories or whatever. I mean, you know, to get people to those places, I mean, you'll find that, the hospital isn't equipped to deal with whatever it is?
Well, I think it really depends on the severity of the illness, because
Right.
as far as I know someone who, there are hospitals in Abuja who can do brain surgery. There are lots of procedures that are possible here. It's just that they will be expensive, but they are possible.
Right. So is the idea catching on?
Well, we have a very long way to go, mostly because first problem is when people hear the word mobile health, they think, oh, it's a health system that goes from place to place, which is not the idea. It's just, but what mobile health is implying is that instead of the doctor waiting in one place and you coming to meet the doctor, you can use your mobile phone to access the doctor.
Right.
So that's a misconception. We still have a long way to go.
Right, okay. Well, Marianne Kuda, thank you very much indeed. That's a very interesting topic there. Well, that's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow for a fresh edition from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.